Hello, and welcome to the Working Tools Podcast. With this episode will be part 2 of our discussion with very worshipful brother Zane McCune about membership, retention, and engagement.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have once again our usual rogues gallery of hosts, worshipful brothers Stephen Chung and Jared Dunham from the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and the Yukon. And it's pretty impressive how you guys timed that together. I know you're not in the same room, but it looked like it. And we have very worshipful brother David Colbeth and myself from the Grand Lodge of Washington.
One, two,
And
three,
we have our...
Oh, sorry. We're going to beat the Canadians. Sorry.
And we have our special guest, very worshipful brother Zane McCune, who is helps out with the Grand Lodge of Washington a lot around here. And just in case you were listening and not watching, we were trying to coordinate hand gestures, but it didn't work out for the YouTube. In our last episode, we were talking with Zane about membership and retention and engagement. I think we talked a fair amount about the general ideas, but I know Zane has some specific, there's a word that I'm looking for that I can't come up with. Props. That's not the right word.
Statistics and details.
Statistics and evidence.
Zaneisms.
What he's talking about.
Zaneisms. That's a whole new thing right there.
Zaneisms.
I don't know about that.
You got to give me credit at least twice, and then it's yours.
I'll give you credit if it takes off. How about that?
Exhibits. That's the word I was looking for. Some exhibits of things that just to support his discussion there. So I guess basically I'm going to kick it off to Zane and say, expanding on what we talked about last time, what have you got for us? Exhibits there.
Well, I'd like to get into the engagement discussion, and maybe a good way to do that is just we had a good talk in the last episode about just sort of membership and what's sort of attributing to the declining numbers. I'll give you a little stat here and just give you a little bit from let's talk about a 10-year period from 2010 to 2020. In the Grand Lodge of Washington, we added 5,230 Masons. During that same period of time, we back in 2010, we had just 16,700 Masons, and by 2020, that number was down to 10,648. So, and that was despite adding those 5,200 some odd Masons. And that's what I mean by a retention issue. And then you can go in and you can break down those, that loss from 16,700 down to 10,600 and what attributes to that. But it's not all, people passing away and heading off to the Celestial Lodge. A lot of it is NPD and commit. You can compare those numbers to the new members over that same period of time that we picked up, and that really starts to drive at your retention issue. And so I think a lodge understanding why its members stick around and what it's most interested in is the key to solving if you want to say we have a membership problem, that's fine. But the key to solving it is really once somebody joins a lodge, they stay in the lodge. And that just makes sense, right? Dave, if you want to flash, maybe this would be a really good time to just flash up that illustration that I sent to you. Maybe this would be a good time to kind of make a disclaimer, and maybe this is a Zaneism that Dave talked about. Let me know when you have that illustration ready to go, Dave. I'll just talk about this a little bit because it does talking about some future periods of time. It goes back to 2015. That dark blue line, you can see from 2015, declining down to about 2021 to where we are today. That orange line below that, that's the number of lodges in the state of Washington. Now, going forward past 2021, it's a little bit of a forecast, right? Because we don't know. But you can take a look at historical data for the last 5 or 10 years and make some assumptions that if things don't change, this is likely what our numbers would look like by the year 2031. We'd probably be sitting at just right around 7,500 Masons. And what I'm representing with that dotted line right there, starting in 2021, is if you were to remove all of the, or eliminate all of the NPDs and demits, if you were to remove that from happening, when Masons join the lodge, they don't leave because they're not interested anymore. They stay. Then the dashed line is actually what our membership statistics would look like out to 2031, and that's just based off of a new membership rate similar to what we've seen in the past. And that gap just widens, over the course of the next 10 years. So this is this is the crux of the issue. And retention is, in my opinion, all tied up in, engagement. So thanks for flashing that, Dave. You got welcome to ask a question. I just wanted to kind of illustrate what that, we solve the membership issue if we solve the retention issue.
So on this diagram, I'm sorry people can't see it, but on this diagram, it looks like the dotted line is just slightly going up. Is there a, again, assuming no NPDs and no demits, that new membership is just outstripping Celestial Lodge?
New membership is just outstripping the Celestial Lodge. And it has been for quite some time. This decline from 2015 to 2021 is almost all attributable to retention. And those are the numbers I gave you earlier. From 2010 to 2020, we gained 5,200 Masons, despite the fact that our numbers dropped from 16,000 down to 10,000.
And you want to talk about retention. Part of the thing to having a good retention is that engagement factor. And
absolutely.
And really, one of the approaches that we've taken in our lodge is that, see, our lodge doesn't really talk about its own culture like you were talking about in your lodge. Our lodge, we encourage them to find what they're looking for. And when we put them through the 6-step program and we bring them into our lodge, we've grilled them enough to find out what they're looking for, whether or not they're a fit. And then once they join our lodge, we're making sure that we're delivering. We're engaging them with what they need. If a fellow joined our lodge and his goal was to seek out the fraternal aspect, meet more brothers, and find those good connections. Well, in order to do that, we know that he needs to go out and visit. He needs to travel and become a traveling man. And so we would try and connect him with the travelers of our lodge and get him to join them in the carpooling and going out and doing those things so that he's engaged properly, right? We've got other guys who they really want to go into the esoteric side of Freemasonry. And so we'll connect them to the brothers in our lodge and in our district that can take him there and can lead him down that path and mentor him along the way, if you will.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And
yeah.
So a lot of that really comes from the teamwork within your lodge to engage them properly so that you do have that retention. And I'll tell you that we implemented that 6-step program from 2012, and we went from an 86% attrition rate to a 92% retention rate. And that's thanks to Bob for doing our numbers, so we knew those stats. But it was an interesting thing to watch that change, and to see the guys sticking around and enjoying it, right? And it's interesting because then, not all of them are making those big connections in our lodge, right? Like we say, we've taken them around. Some guys, when they joined, they were straight up. The shrine did some amazing things for my family, and the experiences that we had with the Shrine Club and what they did made me want to become a Shriner. I don't really have time. I don't really have the desire to get involved much in Blue Lodge. I really just want to become a Shriner, right? And so, I still think that's a worthy goal. Would we not take that brother into our lodge because he wants to be a Shriner and not really a part of our Blue Lodge so much? No. Hey, you know what? If that's where the guy wants to be, he can do some good there, I'm sure. That means he's just going to be another statistic and number in our lodge. But hey, if that can help improve something for the Shriners, and he become an active member of the Shriners and do some real good in our area, we're for that too.
So yeah, just recently moved to the local shrine building as our where we're meeting, and so that's actually one of the things we talked about was that there is a faction of our lodge who is afraid of becoming the Shrine Lodge, essentially just being a feeder for members who want to join the shrine. And somebody who's actually not a member of our lodge pointed out to me that then that's our job to fix that. If we want to, we get the guy in the door, we make him a master mason. It is our job to appeal to him and what he needs as a man and as a mason, and get him, if he's able to stay around, to get him to stay around. We need to figure out what it is that we offer and offer that to them.
And don't show yourself in that either. Don't show yourself in that either, because some guys think, oh, well, it's up to us to fulfill him, but it's not. It's up to us to show him the path, connect him to these things. We can't be everything to everyone that joins. We just can't. We're one lodge.
Right? Steve, I think that's a really good point of why understanding who your lodge culture is one of the key cornerstones to engaging brothers. Because if you're not we looked at it like this when we ran. I'll give you an example. We taught a class, very successful class, came together for the first time this year with another brother, a good friend of mine named Ken Lane. And the class was called The Elephant in the Room. So talking about those things that we're maybe otherwise afraid to talk about. And during that presentation, we identified sort of four. We distilled the cultures of lodges down to four aspects. And you could argue this whether it's 4 or 5, but these were the 4 that we came up with. And it was social, esoteric, charitable, and affinity. And in my mind, what you're describing with a brother who wants to join who is interested in becoming a Shriner is not all that really different than a brother who's maybe really into, I think you said you had you had a lodge there that was really into like a gun club or something like that they go out, right? That's kind of an affinity approach. There's something else that's drawing those men together. And they're also joining a Blue Lodge. And so from my perspective, I would answer that question. It goes back to one of the very first things we talked about in the earlier episode, which was, I want to help you find the right lodge that you're going to thrive in. And let's say you're really into charitable work and charitable giving, and you're looking for an experience with a lodge that maybe they've got a really big endowment and that's what they focus on. That's not our lodge, and we can't build that just because you want to join our lodge. Like you said, Steve, it's like you can't be all things to all people. That's the whole point of being very upfront about what it is that you do, because the last thing we'd want to have happen is have somebody join our lodge, say, oh, I thought I was going to be able to do this and joining your lodge, and I can't do that, and now I'm going to leave. And we have had guys leave over topics like that. once they realized. So they went online and they said, oh, Freemasonry, they give away, $1 million a day. I mean, they see these grand statistics that are nationwide, and they think we're all kind of like that. So unless you're really upfront with who you are, candidates are going to fill in whatever it is they think about Freemasonry and impose that onto your lodge and create this set of expectations that that are not going to be fulfilled. So the difference between the reality of what your lodge offers and their expectations, that gap, the wider that gap is, the higher likely they are going to leave. A lack of engagement. The closer that is together, then your engagement's going to go up because they're finding and getting fulfilled by the things that you do in your lodge and the way that your lodge operates.
So I don't know exactly how it works, or I should say how your lodges down in Washington are. How do you manage, this is just from what I've seen in some areas, is how do you manage the lodges that get upset when someone has suggested that maybe they go to a different lodge that might work best for them, because that first lodge is not looking at helping the prospect find the right fit so much as they're suddenly seeing a loss of a new member. Because I'm assuming, because basically I agree with what you're saying, and that from what I see is that lodges are going to have to work more holistic. I hate to use the term holistically, but like together to sort of find that you realize that, okay, well, we have a candidate that we think would work with your lodge better, but I know a lot of lodges get really upset at the idea of handing off a prospect to another lodge because they're looking at their loss, not our gain.
So I guess it's a great point. It's well, first of all, from our lodge, I can only worry about my lodge, right? I can't, I can't speak for other lodges, but in our lodge, there's been 2 people over during this whole last year, and we've had 11 men reach out to us during the last year of COVID, and that was already on top of the 5 or 6 guys that were actively coming to our events. They weren't Masons, but they were coming to our events. So 2 of these new 11 guys, they reached out to us. We said, sure, here's a little bit more about who we are. If this is interesting, let's have another conversation. So we had another conversation. Come to find out that they work Monday through Friday in the evenings, and their schedule doesn't even line up with our lodge. They couldn't even come to our lodge if they want to. I said, well, how about a Saturday lodge? And yeah, I didn't even know there was a Saturday lodge. Sure, I'm more than happy to introduce you to. We have 2 lodges in our district that meet on Saturdays. You should go meet with both of them and see which one, kind of fits with what you're looking for and hoping to get out of Freemasonry. So, I mean, that's
Right.
that's an easy example, right? Because that's just a conflict.
Well, it really helps when the guys guarding the West Gate, the first contacts that deal with all the prospects that come, are right up front at the beginning and are working together for Masonry as a whole, because we're better to have this particular fellow go and join that lodge and have an awesome Masonic experience than we are to say, no, we want him for our lodge because we need numbers, and then he ends up going non-payment of dues in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's short-term
he's not
thinking,
getting
and
what he needed,
everyone has to understand that is just short-term thinking, because you're again, that's the membership function, right? We got a new member, and so they think that's a win. But in a year from now, when he's left because he's not interested in anything that the lodge is doing, he's no longer been retained. And to your point, he's gone NPD or demit. So how successful were you as a lodge when you took that approach?
right?
Not very successful.
Like one of the, unfortunately, when you're the guy who's connected to everybody in the valley, you get a lot of the questions and complaints from some of the younger guys too, and I tell them if they're not happy where they are, they don't necessarily have to leave their lodge. All right, they can still continue to be part of their lodge and probably find something in their lodge that where they can contribute. But if they're not finding what they're looking for, I try to help them find it. And whether that points them to going traveling down to the other district or up the other end of their own district, to hang out at another lodge where they may find those connections, so be it. But
And how much better would it have been if they just would have done that up front?
right, but because they didn't,
Because they
and you
didn't,
don't,
we might
and
lose
you
them.
don't. Well, there's the thing about poaching guys from another lodge. No, we don't want that happening. No, so I always tell these guys when they come in, you're going to hear guys, I belong to this lodge and that lodge, and I belong to 5 different lodges, right? And it's like, you only have to belong to one. You can go visit the rest.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll give you another little, we just learn so much just by asking people, why do people behave the way they do? It's pretty amazing. When we ran this class, we had 75 brothers dial into a Zoom class, and we just asked them, why do brothers stop attending lodge? Why do you think they stop attending? Why did you stop attending the one you went to and started at another one? Or why do you think guys leave their lodge? And we asked this to the Grand Lodge of Washington in a live forum. And the number one answer that we got during that actual session was boredom. They're just bored. We asked the same question to the Grand Lodge Yukon, BC and Yukon, when we did Grand Masonic Day, and we ran a class. We asked the same question, and the number one answer was expectations. But the number two and lack of expectations, the number 2 and number 3 words were boredom and bored. So clearly there's like a consistency going on there. It's like, that's why guys want to leave, and they're frustrated. When we asked them the question, what is stopping you or your lodge from growing or retaining motivated brothers? It starts to get very split as to why. There's about a third, 28% said that there were some other brothers in the lodge that were just resistant to change. They were resistant to change. Well, this is the way we've always done it. So that's why they don't retain or grow. Those brothers, I would say, if you're unsatisfied with what's going on in your lodge, you should probably find a lodge that you should have joined in the first place. Because if everybody's resistant to change, it's not going to change. That's like the definition of insanity. We're just going to keep banging our head against a brick wall and hope that something. There was another 20% that said there just weren't enough active members. Dave, that might be like your example of, we don't have enough active members to actually run this lodge, and we have other people coming in to kind of help as we go and move along, and we're kind of marching along. Maybe it's time for that lodge to just consolidate, and they would find success in that happening. And then there was another third, 28% total, that said, this is sad. This is like the old apathy and ignorance. Don't know, don't care. 28% answered it that way. Okay, so when we're talking about engagement, things like that, I don't want to get too hypothetical here. These are real people answering real questions. And then when you ask them the lodge experience, is another really telling question. The lodge experience is not fully living up to its ideal purpose or design. 96% agreed. So what they think they are joining in Freemasonry in a lodge is not what they're getting. At some point in time, if you want to retain your members, you owe it to the lodge and you owe it to your other brothers to say, whatever it is that we're doing, maybe the guys don't like it and we need to change and do something different. And so, I can't tell a lodge, here's what you should do, because every lodge is, destiny is, their own decision. I mean, I can give you another example of a lodge that we met with after the elephant in the room. And I'll try to make it as short as possible, but I think this was a very telling example. And I won't say which lodge it is, because they reached out to us and said, "Can you help us and get into this a little bit?" Absolutely. We met with the officers. We went to a lodge meeting. Dove into. They had 7 guys that had been waiting all during COVID to join the lodge, but because of COVID restrictions, they weren't able to join. So we pulled those 7 men who were about to join and said, "What is it about Freemasonry in this lodge that attracts you to want to join them? And what do you expect to get out of this?" And we gave them, is it social, esoteric, charitable, or is there an affinity to this lodge based on some other outside influence? And 6 of the 7 said, "We want to learn more about esoteric education." Okay. So we asked this question to the lodge: what kind of lodge are you? Are you an esoteric lodge, a social lodge, a charitable lodge, or an affinity lodge? And they said, "Oh, we are a social lodge. That is what we do. We like to get together and we bring guys in at different ages, and we talk about all sorts of things." And we said, the 6 guys that are joining your lodge think you are something else. And how long is it going to take for them to realize that that is not who you are? And there was a moment there when we were meeting with them, they were like, "Oh, okay." So that has led to some very interesting officer discussions in that lodge. And I think they have a real strong chance of pivoting around that culture corner and saying, here's what we need to focus on, not the way we've always done it, but what it is that guys who are coming to our lodge now today are expecting.
I'll be the contrarian, you know me, the squeaky wheel. I know that there's an emphasis on trying to identify which of those 4 you peak at. And I know that you'd also talk about a balance, but I think we've talked about in the past that while a lodge can't be everything to everybody, it should be most things. And you need to have social things. You need to have esoterics. You need to have some form of charity, whether that's, as you have well described, agape and the brotherly love charity, forms of charity versus monetary charity. And I think you need to have all those aspects in some different variations. One of the problems, I would agree, that many lodges don't have the esoteric feature. And I would totally agree that if you pulled any Masons, or especially inquirers, they think they're going to be getting esoterics, and they don't get that when they join necessarily. Some stick around anyway, or they move on to other things and learn about it. But yes, a lodge, I've said before, when I first joined Masonry, I assumed there was going to be a Saturday morning class I'd have to go through for 6 months or a year to learn how to be a Mason. And when that didn't happen, that became my expectation. It's about expectations. And so why don't we have a 8 a.m. class on Saturdays to learn about our degrees and to go in depth on our lectures and all that kind of stuff? And our meetings could be the business and social and maybe some education, but why aren't we doing more education on the side? And so I was going to joke earlier and say those darn millennials, all those stats that you took, but I would bet the classes that you took the poll from are all gray-haired guys like us and not the young guys necessarily. It'd be interesting to know what the demographic was, but it really doesn't matter. We're all guys in theory looking for the same goals and the same ideas. Mm-hmm. So, and especially those that are on that kind of a session in that kind of an event, those are probably the engaged guys, the people that are really want to be there. So if you can imagine the fringe that isn't part of that class, they're probably even more disparate statistics. And so I mean, this is another topic for another show, that how do we get a lodge to re-engage with their own Masonic purposes?
Yeah. Well, I think that you have to get the lodge to adopt the 6-step program. Because if they actually do it and they actually go
But
through
no,
it and
we're
read it,
talking about after 6 steps.
Yeah, you found the guys that want to join your lodge and they think that they're going to get something and they don't get that.
We're talking about
And
7 through 12 now.
yeah,
The next 6 steps.
I would say, to answer your question, Dave, you're right. You're not going to be 100% of one thing and 0% of the next 3 things. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for that. And this goes back to one of the very first comments I made was, what are the things in your lodge you value, and how do you describe your culture? What are the things that are important to you? Not what are the things that you solely do, just what are the things that you emphasize and what are important. And so when a brother asks, or when a prospective member asks, well, what kind of charitable work do you do? We do have actual charitable work in our lodge that we do. It's not, I wouldn't say that's defining us, but that's not that we don't have it. And if a guy said, well, what kind of social things do you do? I can give them, here's what we do on, guys' night out, and we're going down to the range, and we're going, we've got a camping trip coming up next weekend, our lodge camping trip, which is always real fun. So there's lots of good things that we do, but those social things, we also let them know these are done when we're outside of the lodge. When we're in the lodge, these are the things that we focus on.
Sure.
And so that's part of our culture and who we are.
And that goes back to Steve's point that if the lodge knows who they are and what they are, whether it's a little bit above on some things and a little bit below on some other things, that can be presented as part of the 6 steps so that they can have an understanding of what they're about to get into.
Yeah, probably what mostly happens is, we've all been kind of groomed on charitable and social. And the overarching issue is we don't really have a lot of esoteric discussion. It's that Masonic education that guys think they're going to get when they show up to a lodge. And that really, I think, is the gap. If a lodge can incorporate that back into their lodge experience, I think that's going to go a long way to sort of, counterbalance what might have gotten, perhaps a little top heavy in social and charitable. And so how do you do that? How do you bring presentations? I think there was a little banter early on, guys that have maybe not had a leadership role at work don't feel confident about bringing a leadership role into the lodge. I'd even twist it the other way around. Where else is there a better place to hone your leadership skills than in a room full of your brothers who want nothing but the best for you? And so work out the maybe the butterflies that you get when you stand up in front of a group of people that you're speaking in front of. So if you're going to have a guy join the lodge and never have him stand up in front of the lodge and speak on a topic, you're doing him a disservice and you're doing the lodge a disservice. I always tell guys, everybody's interested in at least one topic that they would just research the heck out of and then would love to talk about it with the guys in the lodge. Everybody has at least one of those. And if you have 10 guys in your lodge, which is small, you have 10 topics, you have, a whole year's worth of presentations to have, for the ensuing year.
I've said before, and I'll say it again, there's no better training for a businessman than being a Freemason.
Yeah.
Small business, big business, there's no better, and it's virtually free training on how to run a business with people who really want you to succeed.
Absolutely.
And I think on that note, we're about out of time again. I think what a lot of that conversation boiled down to was what they called in business school many years ago when I was there, managing expectations, both the lodges and the prospective members. But so with that, thank you again, Very Worshipful Brother Zane, for coming on our humble podcast. And on behalf of Stephen and Jared and David and myself, thank you all for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again on the Working Tools podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on the show, guys.
And remember to subscribe if you like our stuff.
Always forget to say that. Yes. Check it out on the various media and subscribe. And we put some stuff up on Facebook, including we're interested in finding out what you guys want to hear about. We talk a lot about what we like to talk about, which is great, works for me. But if there's somebody out there who wants to hear another topic, please come over on Facebook and let us know what you'd like to hear, and we'll see what we can do. So, and again, on our behalf, thanks, Zane, and thank you all for listening.